All right, this is going on page 87 when we are done. So we are going to look at the unit circle once again. No. You know your sine, cosine, and tangent values. At least you should. Especially for the first quadrant, then you can use that to help you figure everything else out. Now, on 2 of the assignments that you turned in, there were some questions where you had to do secant and cosecant and cotangent, and those were things that sometimes you got to calculate a little bit for. But I want you to see the patterns in that too. And at this point, now that you have all those values under your belt, that maybe you can start just trying to understand these a little bit better. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do on the circle, and the only thing we're going to do right now, is write in our quadrantals. So the quadrantals are 0 or 2 pi, right? What is this one? Pi halves. This one is pi. And this is 3 pi halves. Okay. So then we're going to get the ordered pairs for those. What is the ordered pair for this one? 1, 0. There's a lot of people that get that backwards. I don't know why. What is this one? 0, 1. What is this one? -1, 0. And this one is 0, -1. Please do not miss those. I mean, come on. Okay? Please, please. All right, so now let's look down at this little chart here. And so I have this split up by your quadrantals up here and then the quadrant 1 down here. And then instead of it going sine, cosine, tangent, it's sine and its reciprocal, cosine, reciprocal, tangent, reciprocal. So our sine for 0 or 2 pi is what? For 0 or 2 pi, your sine value is 0. Thank you. It is 0. Then what is the reciprocal of 0? No, undefined. So the cosecant then is undefined because you cannot take the 1 divided by 0 is undefined. So then what is the cosine of 0 or 2 pi? 1. What is the reciprocal of 1? 1. So secant is 1. Cosine and secant have the same value at that point. What is the tangent of 0? 0. So what is the cotangent then? Undefined. Okay. All right, so then we move on to pi halves. What is the sine of pi halves? 1. That means the cosecant is what? 1. Cosine is what? 0. That means the secant is undefined. What is the tangent? Undefined. So what is the cotangent? 0. So let's just be real clear here. I can ask you a question like this and say, okay, what is the reciprocal of 0? The reciprocal of 0 is undefined. If I ask you what is the reciprocal of undefined, undefined does not have a reciprocal. Okay, so 0 is not the reciprocal of undefined. The reason we get 0 out of that is because the way we get undefined is 1 over 0, and then the way you actually get cotangent is 0 over 1, and that's where the 0 comes from. Does that make sense? I just don't want you thinking that undefined has a reciprocal, because it doesn't. All right, so let's go back down here, and let's look at pi. All right, what's the sine of pi? 0. That means the cosecant is undefined. See that? Cosine is what? -1. So secant is -1. What is the tangent? 0. So cotangent is undefined. Am I boring you? No. Yes. 3 pi halves. What's the sign? -1. So the cosecant is -1. Cosine is 0, so the secant is undefined. Tangent is undefined, so cotangent is 0. Okay, we good with all that? All right, so now we're going to go back up there and we're going to fill in our quadrant 1 values. In quadrant 1, what's 30 degrees? Pi 6. Then 45 is pi 4ths is pi 3rds. I know the drill. All right, so then our ordered pairs for pi 6, and I can get that from the hand trick, right? It's going to be square root of 3 over 2, 1/2. And I don't know how you were trying to get your hand in the third quadrant there, Michael, but I was very confused with your... Yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, there, okay. Then pi fourths, square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, and then this is 1/2 square root of 3 over 2. Okay. So we're all good with all those, yes? Okay. So then let's go back down here, and let's look at pi sixths. Okay, so sine of pi sixths. What's the sine of pi sixths? 1/2. So then cosecant, which is the reciprocal, is what? 2. No big deal, right? Then cosine of pi sixths is square root of 3 over 2. So when you had to do the reciprocal of that on those assignments, I assume at least the first few times you probably calculated it. So 2 over the square root of 3, then I rationalize, and that becomes square root of 3 over 3. Good. 2 square root of 3 over 3. And I think that hopefully we've rationalized so much that you're kind of at the point where you can kind of rationalize in your head. You maybe don't necessarily have to write everything down. All right, so then tangent, what's the tangent of pi 6? Oh, yeah, I did it. I did it wrong. Thank you. I did do it wrong. I said one thing and wrote another one. Thank you. All right, so then what is the tangent of pi 6? Square root of 3 over 3. So when I take that reciprocal to get cotangent, and then I rationalize it, that gives me 3 square root of 3 over 3, which gives me what? Square root of 3. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so pi fourths, what is the sine of pi fourths? Square root of 2 over 2. So when we take that reciprocal and we have 2 over the square root of 2, that's 2 square root of 2 over 2, which is square root of 2. Okay, so we're going to pause right here. Because these are the only 3 values that you have to, or these are the 2 that you have to know for sine and cosine, and this is the 2 that you have to know for tangent. So the reciprocals, there's really only 3 of them that you need. Okay, and if you notice that if the numerator and the denominator have the same number, and I'm ignoring the square root, of course, but square root of 3 over 3 and square root of 2 over 2, the reciprocal of those are just what the numerators are, square root of 3 and square root of 2. Okay, so you don't need to calculate it every time. You shouldn't even necessarily have to think through the calculations. But then the one where they don't match, then that just gives you the 2 times the square root of 3 over 3. So you shouldn't need to calculate every time, because if you hadn't already noticed, you're pretty much calculating the same thing every time. It's like the same thing over and over again. So if you can see the patterns and see how they match up, which ones go together, then you just kind of learn what they are, and you won't have to go through that every single time. Okay? No, it's the square root of a monkey. A monkey. The square root of a monkey over a monkey, yeah. There you go. Yeah, okay. Got it. All right, so cosine of pi fourths, square root of 2 over 2. So its reciprocal is what? Square root of 2. What is the tangent of pi fourths? 1. So the cotangent is 1. Pi thirds, what's the sine of pi thirds? Square root of 3 over 2. So its reciprocal then is going to be 2 square root of 3 over 3. Then cosine of pi thirds is 1/2. So the secant is 2. Tangent of pi thirds is the square root of 3. So the cotangent has to be what? Square root of 3 over 3. Okay. So this is just another way to look at the information to see those other patterns in there, okay, because there's just so many. So figure out whatever makes the most sense in your mind for you to be able to connect all these things together, because you don't have time to just calculate everything from scratch every time, and you don't have time to write out the full unit circle every time either, okay? We all good? All right, so that's going to go, you can go ahead and put that in your ISN on page, whatever it is I said, 87, thank you. And I'm going to give you the second part of the review, and then we're going to go over a couple of those together as well. That's why I didn't give it to you already. I didn't want you working on it and getting ahead of me. Okay, so there are a ton of these, but this is like, there's still some things mathematically that require some drill and practice, and this, I believe, is one of them. So on here, we're going to, on the front, 1 through 10 is very much like your quiz, okay? Just having some sine, cosine, and tangent, all just in one rotation. Then I throw in some negatives, then I throw in some, reciprocals, and then it'll have more than one rotation. So we're going to do a couple of these together. Look on the back. We're going to do number 21. And I'm going to write some things down that you don't necessarily have to write down. Some of you may want to, just so that you don't lose track of your thoughts, but then I'm also writing them down so that you can kind of keep up with what I'm saying as well. There's no time when you're answering questions like this to write out a full unit circle. And if you work these just staring at your notes, you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to be able to do it on your own. So you need to try and do it without looking at anything except what you can get out of your own brain. And then, of course, go check yourself, but you don't have to, but don't just be copying it off the unit circle. So I'm looking for the cosecant. I want to write down maybe this. All students take calculus. And that also gives me a little x and y axis for me to be able to think around the circle. Okay? So I want the cosecant of negative pi thirds. First of all, cosecant is the reciprocal of what? Sine. So I'm going to write down 1 over sine theta, just so I remember that whatever I figure out from this, I need to take the reciprocal of it. But again, you don't necessarily have to write it down, but it's at least part of your thoughts. Okay, so then I have to ask myself, what's the reference angle for negative pi thirds? Pi thirds, right? And so the sine, I can figure out the sine of pi thirds. What's the sine of pi thirds? Square root of 3 over 2. So I'm going to put sine theta equals square root of 3 over 2, because it's not my answer. That's the sine. But I need to have that thought at least. Then I need to figure out, yes? Well, the sine of pi thirds, just of the reference angle, is the square root of 3 over 2. Just the reference angle. So then I figure out which quadrant I'm in. Which quadrant is negative pi thirds in? Fourth. And so that's kind of what you were asking there. So I'm in the fourth quadrant. In the fourth quadrant, is sine positive or negative? Negative. So it is going to be a negative, and I need the negative reciprocal. What's the reciprocal of the square root of 3 over 2? 2 square root of 3 over 3, and it's negative. Okay? So there's like 4 or 5 things. I didn't actually count them, but there's things you have to think through and make sure that you've thought about all those things before you can come up with the answer. That make sense? And if you have nothing else written down but the answer, that's fine, but these things should be in your brain at least, okay? And some of you might want to jot some things down, and just so that you don't lose track of what your things are. Well, yes, yeah, you can think of it that way too. It's the same thing, yes. Yeah. All right. So let's look at another one. Let's see. Let's do number 31. Jump to 31. I want the cosine of negative 11 pi halves. Okay, I know, right? Okay, so if we're thinking in terms of halves, 1 full rotation is how many pi halves? 4. 4 pi halves gets me to 2 pi, right? So if it's negative, I'm going to go, this is a negative 4 pi halves. I do that again, that's negative 8 pi halves. And then to get to 11, I go how many more? 3. So I go negative 3 pi halves. I actually end up there. I rotate a few times around, but that's where I end up, okay? So that's all you care about. Where did I end up? I ended up at pi halves. So all I really want is the cosine of pi halves. What's that? 0. And that's your answer. The negative's how I got there, yeah. Okay. You got it? Yeah, because you go clockwise. Okay. Everybody okay with that? So there's a few on here that have more than one rotation, so you just got to think, take out the full rotation and where do you get, and just think about going around the circle, okay? What questions do you have? All right, so here's what the general consensus was last period. I'll ask y'all as well. The review part I gave you yesterday, I'm going to make a video of me working all the questions and explaining it. This one, is it fine if I just put a key up there? Okay, because I'll have a few of these that I talk through, but me talking through every single one of those, that's going to take forever. Yeah, that's kind of what I felt like. If I just give you the key, you can check yourself and you can figure them out from there. Okay, so that's what I'll do. So use the rest of this time to your advantage.